Ralph Preston here. William Lowe and I are back for another roadmap discussion, and this week we're going to talk about the concept of success builds on success. Last week, it's kind of an extension of a little bit of what we talked about last week in terms of getting some momentum going. So, William, I know before we started recording, you had some thoughts on this. Why don't you start us off as usual, and then we'll bounce it back and forth.
Yeah, sure. So I think the idea of success builds on success is really important when it comes to stroke recovery, because quite often in recovery after stroke, it can be really hard to know whether or not you're actually making improvements in your recovery, especially if you're not being observant, and especially if you're not paying attention to what you're doing. And I would even go as far as to say that being attentive can actually be the one of the most important things in recovery after stroke, right next to exercise. Because if you can identify what something is working, then obviously it allows you to understand how you can do certain things to get a particular response from your brain, and that response being obviously more neuroplasticity, or waking up more of those pathways in your brain which might have been damaged or weakened since you had your stroke. So one of the things I've seen in a lot of stroke survivors who I've coached personally and exchanged notes with since I've had my stroke, and ever since I started coaching people for a living, is this idea that a lot of stroke survivors, they tend to look outside of themselves for solutions for their recovery after stroke. And what I mean by this is that a lot of stroke survivors, they might have been discharged from therapy, or they might have run out of insurance benefits. Some of these stroke survivors find themselves stuck because they've been doing a lot of the same exercises for months or years on end, ever since their benefits have ended or their therapy has ended. And what tends to happen when they get into a situation where they're stuck is some of these stroke survivors, rather than looking at the problem itself, which is the exercises they're doing, they look outside of themselves for maybe the latest gadget or the latest gizmo, which is going to help them cure themselves of their stroke. And I think that this can be really detrimental, because obviously when they first started doing their home exercise program, they might have noticed that they saw some improvements in their recovery, and there was an upward trend in terms of their recovery after stroke. But at some point, maybe around the 6-month or 3-month mark, they might have found that their improvements tapered off or reached a plateau. And the reason why this happened was because the brain has simply gone on autopilot, because it's probably already mastered all of these exercises and gotten as good as it possibly can from the exercises which it started doing already. So we already know that the exercises worked in your favor when it comes to your recovery. And we already know that the exercises were helping your brain to recover a lot more. So it would make no sense to look outside of the exercise to look for something which is going to look for a gadget or a gizmo which is going to help your recovery. But rather, I think that you would find more success looking at the exercises which you're currently doing and trying to identify ways in which you can modify or change up the way that you're doing something, so that you can start to see more changes or more improvements in your recovery after stroke. And quite often, I find that when you look at the exercise you're doing, and when you change your routine, or when you change how you're doing particular exercises, these small changes and these small tweaks, they can lead to the biggest breakthroughs in recovery after stroke, because what you're doing is you're allowing your brain to break out of a rut without spending a lot of money on, trying to figure out which gadget or which new gizmo is going to help improve your recovery after stroke. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think gadgets and gizmos, they do have a time and place in recovery after stroke, but there's not going to be one gadget or one gizmo which is going to help you get to the promised land. At the end of the day, the research has shown that exercise after stroke, especially targeted exercise, is the most beneficial in terms of helping your brain create more neuroplasticity, in terms of creating more neuroplasticity within your brain, and I guess creating a response in your brain in order to want to actually recover. So one example of changing how you might do something in your home exercise program could be something as simple as going up the stairs with your affected leg instead of your non-affected leg. And I find that this can be a huge breakthrough for a lot of stroke survivors, because quite often when you're receiving therapy through insurance, the consensus is that a lot of therapists tell their patients, or a lot of patients or stroke survivors are taught to actually go upstairs with their non-affected leg. And the reasoning behind this is because by going up with your non-affected leg or your stronger leg in the early days of your recovery after stroke, it can A, reduce the risk of falling, and 2, it can also help assist your brain in connecting the dots when it's learning how to walk, because the reason why walking comes back so quickly is because your brain can actually use the non-affected side as a reference point to allow your affected leg to wake up a lot more and allow those signals to connect from your brain. So when you're doing a home exercise program for a long period of time, and you're doing the exact same thing for years or months on end, such as going upstairs with your non-affected leg, doing something as simple as changing the way you go upstairs by using your affected leg, that can make a huge difference in your recovery, as you might be able to wake up parts of the brain which might have gone to sleep because you had never touched them in the early days of your recovery. And what tends to happen in recovery after stroke is that when you don't pay attention to a certain movement or a certain part of the body after your stroke, those signals which your brain had sent to that part of your body before your stroke, they tend to go to sleep, or they tend to go into a or they tend to become dormant. So when you do something completely out of left field, something different, such as going upstairs with your affected leg, this can actually wake up parts of your brain which haven't received a lot of attention since you've had your stroke, and it can allow your brain to build new pathways and have more light bulb moments, which would result in more breakthroughs or possible improvements in your recovery after stroke. So I think that's why I believe that the whole idea of success builds on success is such a big thing in recovery after stroke, because if you can get to a place in your recovery or get into a headspace where you're able to identify what really works for your brain and what types of things create a response in your brain, then you essentially have a formula which you can rely on to identify the exercises or the things you can do on a day-to-day basis in order to allow you to keep the ball rolling in your recovery after stroke and continue to see changes and improvements, even when you've been told otherwise by your clinicians, or even when you've passed the first 6 months, which is when the research shows that that's when the most improvement occurs and when it tends to stop. So I know, Ralph, earlier you and we were talking about this idea of looking outside of yourself for solutions to your recovery after stroke and not necessarily looking at the exercises. I was just wondering, did you have any thoughts to share about this idea which I just raised?
Sure. A couple things. Number one, I completely agree about being observant. Maybe because I'm an observant person, or maybe because the fact that I was observant in my recovery worked well for me. So I tend to think the things that work for me will work for everybody. Generally, that's true. Since everybody had a different stroke and everything, we won't go there, but generally that's true. The reason for that, there are a number of reasons for that. We're talking about success builds on success. Well, it's sometimes hard to measure success. So if you feel successful every day, or like you're making small improvements, then you're going to feel successful, and success builds on success. It makes you want to get up and do it tomorrow. It makes you look forward to being able to do better and do better every day. Okay, so that's real easy if you're trying to do like push-ups, because you can measure how many push-ups you do. It's not so easy in terms of, say, measuring your walking, the quality of your walking. So you have to be pretty observant to say, okay, you know, I'm throwing that leg a little better, and I'm pushing off that toe a little better than I did yesterday. You know, those are fairly subtle things. And if you're just, you know, putting on the earphones and stomping through your routine, and I'm not trying to knock music or earphones or anything, because you can certainly pay attention to what you're doing and listen to music. But if you're just, so let's drop the earphones, you're trying to just like knock out your routine, I say you'd be better off to pay as much attention to it as you can, because then you'll be more likely to notice the small improvements and feel successful and build on that success. As far as the steps example goes, there are a couple other things that are going on there in my mind anyway. I don't remember. I suppose they taught me to go up that way in the beginning. I don't really remember it, because I always believed that you should be able to do everything equally. You know, before my stroke, I never said, okay, I'm going to make sure I go up with this left foot or this foot. I walked up the steps, and whichever one was next, that was the one that went. So I actually practiced that after I got good at doing it the way the therapists will teach you. Because I believe in being bilateral. I believe in having both sides work equally well. But one other thing that does, you know, and the first time you stand there and try and go up the steps with your other foot, I experienced this, and I bet you may have too, William, and other people out there, maybe you get a chuckle out of this. First time you try that, you stand there and you go, okay, I'm going to go up with the other foot. Okay, I'm going to go up with the other foot. So you got to like try and convince yourself, because your brain is just so used to, like, it's lazy. It doesn't like change. So it's going to be telling you, no, Ralph, we always go up with a strong foot. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? I mean, I know this has happened not just at the steps, happened a number of times with me, where you just, you get there and you go, okay, come on, you can do it. You can do it. And you convince yourself to do it, and you do it. And if you're successful, that's a really big step on success builds on success. Not only in that moment, but if you think about it in terms of the bigger picture, the next time you're standing there rocking, going, okay, come on, brain, we can do this. You can think back to the last couple of times that it worked for you. And so if you do that, if you start doing that, you'll end up doing that more, which ends up mixing up your routine more, which is, a good thing, because, it all comes back to building neuroplasticity, and mixing up your routine helps build more connections. I mean, we're not building neuroplasticity, we're building connections using neuroplasticity. And the 6-month thing is for, it's not, I don't think you stated it wrong, William, but I don't want anybody to have any impression. That's for, what's it called? There's like automatic healing or something that goes on for about 6 months, plus or minus. And that tends to go away at that point. Neuroplasticity does not last a lifetime, and you won't even notice the difference at 6 months. You shouldn't. If you do, you're listening to somebody you shouldn't be listening to. Or you have some other kind of problem, like you're doing the same thing over and over again. So that's making you feel like you plateau. But there's no reason you can't just keep on getting better as long as you keep working. I don't know that, anybody gets back to perfection, but everything that I've seen in my recovery and everybody I've helped, as long as people work, they get better. So those are some of my thoughts. Well, I know you had a couple other points, William. I've got a few more, but bounce it back to you, and I'll mention mine in a minute or two.
Yeah, sure. So the second point, which I wanted to add on to just this whole idea of success builds on success, is this idea of making sure that you check and review your work. And this is something which I discovered early on in my recovery. And it's also something which I advocate for my paying clients, is that you don't know you don't know if something's working if you don't check whether or not you've made an improvement every time you try something new in your recovery. One of the things which I've seen a lot of stroke survivors do is they miss out on opportunities to actually recover more because they forget to review their work and review whether or not something's working. And this could be something as simple as whenever you try a new exercise, or whenever you go to your physical therapist or therapy through insurance and they give you a new exercise. It could be something as simple as testing out whether or not your walking feels a lot better the next day, or whether or not it feels a lot better the next week. I know for myself, based on the feedback I've received from people who I've helped, they've told me that they noticed that after exercises, that maybe a week later they feel like they're walking in more of a rhythm whenever they walk, or they feel like they're not spending as much time on their stronger leg or their non-affected leg as before. So I think checking in and making sure that you review your work, that's really paramount, because it can help you, again, identify what is actually working and what is allowing your brain to be successful. And I think this idea actually comes from my background when I used to play a lot of sports, is that you don't know whether or not you're getting better at a sport unless you find a way to identify why you're doing something better. For example, if you're playing basketball, why you're shooting a lot better, or why you can dribble the ball a lot better. And especially in stroke recovery, when the improvements are so small, this is really important, because quite often people may miss out on the small movements which may be indicative that their brain has actually gotten something back. So it might be, and I know, Ralph, you've shared this before with the people watching, but your story of how you woke one morning and you noticed that you were able to move your fingers maybe a quarter of an inch or an eighth of an inch to open. And over time, because you noticed that, you were able to build that up to a tangible movement where you were actually able to open up your hand completely. It could be something as small as that. But if you're a stroke survivor and you don't check and review your work, then you can miss out on these small improvements which might be happening, but they might be so small that you can't see them. However, they could be an opportunity for you to turn a really small movement into something bigger, which can improve your quality of life completely. Such as obviously what I shared about Ralph, when he was able to open up his fingers a little bit, being able to go from that to completely opening up your hand. I would imagine that changed your recovery quite a lot, right, Ralph?
Well, yeah, it did. It also, I got started on that probably within a few days of being at the rehab hospital. Certainly one of the first or second or third days of OT, and it was 5 days in neuro. So, somewhere after about a week, I got instructed to do that. And maybe a few days later, I saw a teeny amount of movement. And then I saw what could happen by, building on it. I was pretty skeptical about the whole thing. I'll have to admit that. I mean, I didn't stare at your hand till it moves. Didn't seem to make a lot of sense. But the point of the reason I'm saying is not to retell the story. It's that occurred to me fairly early on in my recovery. And I spent all my time, when I wasn't in I did PT twice a day, OT twice a day, and pool therapy. So I was pretty busy. But when I wasn't busy, I paid attention to my hand and tried to move it. And so I learned a couple of things. I learned that, paying strict attention often produced results, and that some of those results were really minor, like moving your fingers an eighth of an inch. If you aren't paying pretty good attention to that, you might miss it. But more importantly, I learned that by paying attention and then working on that, which could include changing things up or doing more of what works and dropping something that doesn't work, adjusting your routine, that kind of thing. I had an early experience that was positive, and so that kind of taught me subliminally to focus intensely on my recovery and see what else I might be able to observe and take that information back into the modification process and get better results. And so that's what I did. It doesn't hurt that I'm like probably the world's most detail-oriented person, but before and after my stroke. But so it came fairly easily to me. But I'm mentioning it because I think that these things, I know they work for me, and I think that you'll find that they work for you. So one more thing, just before I forget, one of the things that I think about in terms of success builds on success. How do you make sure you're successful? Well, we've talked a little bit about, talked a good deal about being observant. Another thing you can do is set small, achievable goals. People who listen to me have heard me say this a number of times, but it's true. You don't want to set a goal of, running a 5K by the end of next month. You want a more realistic goal would be, I hope to be running by the end of next month, running in some way, shape, or form, or whatever. If you don't want to set yourself up for failure. And the other thing is, if you set small goals, then you're much more likely to achieve them than if you have big goals or long-term goals. I set like daily goals, and so that I could achieve something every single day. I didn't have to wait to measure again, like William was talking about, measuring your success. I didn't have to wait a week, especially if it was something like working on push-ups or something where you have a number. And one of the things I try and tell people is that if you do 8 push-ups one day after doing 7 for a month, the goal for the next day is not to do 9, it's to do 8 again. And also you should be happy with doing 7, because that's what you were always doing. So I found a good way to feel successful every day was to set these small, achievable goals, and to not set them so high that I felt like I wasn't achieving them, because that'll make you feel defeated. So it's not a matter of fooling yourself. It's a matter of back to paying attention. Set small goals because you can achieve them. Pay attention because some of the things that you're going to measure by require that attention in order to notice them, because they're fairly subtle. So what else have you got, William, before we wrap this up?
Yeah, just to add on to your idea of setting the small goals, I think that another way that you can identify whether or not you're actually making progress in your recovery after stroke, and this really ties into the whole idea of success builds on success, is taking the opportunity to continuously seek feedback on how you can actually improve your recovery. And this could be how you can walk a lot better. For for example, like I mentioned earlier, walk with more of a rhythm, or even something as simple as lift up your arm a lot better so that you're not craning it up like that, but you're using the actual correct muscle to actually lift it up as close as possible to before your stroke. And I think this is really important because as stroke survivors, and I know this as a survivor myself, as well as helping stroke survivors in their journey as well, it can be really hard to see improvements because you're living it day by day. So I think if you become a lifelong student of recovery after stroke and you continuously seek feedback to improve, it can really help you to stay motivated in your journey to recovery after stroke. And what this would basically mean is making sure that, let's say you're still receiving therapy through insurance, that every time you see your therapist, you're always asking them questions, is this movement a lot stronger compared to the last time you saw me? Is my walking looking a lot better? What can I do? What can I do to make sure I'm lifting up my arm so that I'm not craning up my shoulder like that? Or what can I do to make sure I'm not swinging my leg around whenever I go upstairs so it doesn't look like I'm walking like I'm drunk? And I think because, like Ralph mentioned, neuroplasticity never really ends. It's a continuous progress. It's a continuous. It's a continuous process that if you can get as much information from the people around you or from the support network which you have around you on ways which you can improve your recovery, then essentially you can never run out of ideas on how to actually continue to move the needle forward in your recovery after stroke. And I think that's just one of the main things I want to add on to everything we've covered today. I think if there's one thing you can remember from our conversation here today, I think that will be the thing to remember if you're really going to take this idea of success builds on success to heart and apply it to your recovery after stroke.
Well, I'd just like to reiterate the whole thing about about being a lifelong learner of on stroke and stroke recovery. There are three things I tell newbies to do. One is number one is be your own best patient advocate, because the medical system isn't working for you. You have to make sure it works for you. Work on becoming your own PT, because you're going to need to be your own PT eventually when your insurance runs out. And the third thing is that, that you're going to basically, I didn't use the word lifelong learner, but learn all you can about stroke from now on, because it's just really useful. The more you understand the way things work, the more focused and targeted of an approach you can take. If you don't understand why an exercise works when so ask your physical therapist while you have them. This is another point that we bounced around earlier, William. Ask your physical therapist questions while you have them, because if you don't understand how an exercise works, then it's a lot harder to figure out how it fits into an overall exercise program, and how doing more of them or dropping one thing for another thing is going to be beneficial if you don't really have any idea of what these things are doing. So don't just, take the sheets and the homework they give you and, blindly do it. Ask questions, make sure you understand it, pay attention when you're doing it, look for little minor changes so you can get, so you can feel like you're making some progress, having some success, and that'll give you a better shot at having success tomorrow and the next day, in my opinion and experience. So, anything else?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one final point is this ties into the point I made earlier about seeking feedback to improve your recovery. It could be as simple as taking video of yourself walking, or taking video of yourself performing an exercise which you might have been given by your physical therapist the week before. And the good thing about video is that you can actually take the video to your physical therapist, and you can both sit down and you can watch the video, and they can give you pointers or ideas on how you can actually improve your movement and why whatever you're doing is working, or whether or not the thing you're actually doing is actually working in your favor. And especially the way that therapy is structured in the United States, I believe you guys only get 10 to 12 sessions through insurance. You only get a limited amount of time of therapy. And in order to make the most out of the therapy, and in order to actually get the most success or get the most out of that therapy so that you can get the most success once you've run out of your benefits, it's important to make sure that you educate yourself on how you can travel the journey yourself when you no longer have access to a physical therapist. So I highly recommend that you take video of your stroke recovery and the exercise you're doing, and you use this as a tool to really help you review your work with the assistance of someone who is going to provide an objective perspective and also a professional one. And this is obviously going to come from your physical therapist. And I think as you go through that process and as you ask the questions and you inform yourself, then that can allow you to identify how to get the most success out of your recovery, even though you've left the hospital or even though you've run out of insurance. So I think that's really the last point I want to cover in terms of this idea of success building on success. And I think, obviously, if you continue to video yourself, not only will it provide a useful learning tool, but you can use it as something to reflect on once you're further down the line in your recovery after stroke, where you can compare yourself to where you were maybe a year ago compared to where you are now. And you can tell yourself that, recovery actually is possible. And even though it might seem like it's taking a long time, small improvements over time, they can lead to even bigger ones, which improve the overall quality of your life after you've had a stroke.
Okay, well, I'll close this out, but before I do, I just wanted to say I would agree with the whole video thing. The video guy here, the video professional of 40 years, didn't record himself until he was about 9 years in when he started recording recovery exercise videos. I wouldn't change a whole lot about what I did in my recovery because it worked pretty well. But if I could hit rewind, one thing I probably would like to have done would be to have made videos all along, because they're just very useful for comparison. I mean, there it is, you can look at it. So that's pretty much it from William and I this week, and just let it be known that we like feedback, so put your comments and your questions down below in the comment section. We do look at them and answer them. So we'll see you again next time on the next roadmap.
Right. Thanks, Ralph.
All right. Thank you.